Yeah, trying to keep the foot down on these young guys, you know, to make sure. No, he's actually older than me, but the younger and this. I'm still somehow like one of the youngest guys. I played Nickel today. We have a very good tournament, yes. There's really cool guys right now that are all. Four guys in the eliminator. This court is the worst place for you to be if you want to serve. It just feels like nothing's going on. You really have to kind of beat through it down. I spent many years with the I was probably the same height. You would have gotten massacred the way everybody returned. The railroad's really kind of fallen out. So Rob really loved the railroad. Big kind of banging around with the ball and chase. And that's kind of suits his style of play. Where it doesn't necessarily suit mine, so I serve it from time to time. Even like but these days I stick to more high serves and things like that. Because the ball's so hard now, the rackets are so tight, pace it just decreases a lot. Yeah, it's like the service on the only one place on the court. The Exos games have taken kind of really aggressive now. People aren't going to play the floor the way you have to because the ball's coming off the ball so fast. Well, because it's coming off the ball so fast, it's so hard to be under control. It's not slowed down where you can just say, oh, I'll take my time. Oh, pinging at plus miles an hour and breaking the shot. So, most of their answers to that is just any back. So, what you end up with is pretty confident. Maybe on the return and serve, when you're top out. But within the rally, unless the ball's going on the ground, it's pretty much being tricky. Yeah, the court is kind of does matter, but I would say and that's just for like to get to like very top teams. Joey, thank you very much. Pretty well. Not this week. Great job. Yeah. No, not yet. I've actually been clear. He basically was making a adjustment for Philadelphia. He was going to give me actually tell that so I'll probably start using it next year. He's doing a great job. I think it's a great, maybe going I make 50
He played the last game and he gets so really good. That's the hard part. And he's still once he's grown a bit.
already got all the very good. Pretty good 10 minutes left. I quite like them. I think one of my biggest issues is the tournament has been very great opportunity. I like that. I think there's bring a try. It's quite hard to get a game like this. Oh, that's fair. Say, hey, we need to play hard. I would if I was running a club. That's with shipping and customs around it, that's about $70. I used to teach in Bostwick. Yeah. And that's the thing, those are basically just kind of like, yeah, they're basically, especially at the beginning stages, you know. Yeah? Aiken's got a pretty rich history. What? So I might have to tell him, but I'm pretty sure that Aiken, not just Aiken, but one school in Aiken, has produced the 5 American countries. Myself, 40, and was 5. They don't turn out a lot of players, but the ones that they do, it is beautiful. Some people think of issues coming in on the floor. It's been 100 years of being very green. So it's in pristine condition. And then the last 20 years, before you started on the way up. So it's getting the normal air trade towards organic. But it's so really consistently. Now we're getting the issues that people get such a hard time. So I think I'm going to have to look at some. I think it would. Exactly. being here is not necessarily helping me. Yeah, this is, I made it, prioritize things. I'm not sure that's going to go. A bit of a doghouse. But yeah, I'm here. I think for a couple more years. I would imagine. So she's actually from Hungary. So the plan is to move to Hungary eventually. I think we're probably 5. So maybe I'll try to do a course over there. Still play battle tennis in the U.S. It's called class now. One game. My children and I used to go play the national championship. Stupid game. Not nearly as much fun as we have. I think that's, we get to do this. We don't but it's in no way taken off like that. It's hard to get mad at pickleball. What we have is just as big. Weird names for things, different rackets, different ball, way outside of the norm. I do think tennis is there's too many other racket sports that are easier access, easier to play. They need to remix. Those two things are the biggest things. I got ideas. So it's actually helping out people for this month. He's the Yeah, I grew up like he was coming to Asia, this is his career. Korea, never even been to America. He's one of the only guys pushing rock at the time. Takes the job. Yep, takes the job in Asia. Comes out and plays maybe
We played together in Colton.
So his goal is to, he didn't want to be a quartet pro. His goal is to get out of the game. He came to the U.S., went back to school, to give it immigration. This is where I get into a lot of arguments about it. Yes, what if I throw 10 balls before X and how many times do you actually get to do this? If your answer is 5, you shouldn't even be attempting. Because yes, it's unexpected, but you can't hit it. No, that's what I mean. It's all about the ball. Higher percentage shot is to go down the line and hit it. I'm going to do that. It's all about protecting great shots.
It didn't matter what sport I played, I always did the best I could. Individual and team sports, I just enjoyed them all. It's hard to qualify for the Open. For me, it was a great accomplishment because it's very hard to do. It was so much fun playing 5 or 6 different sports at a fairly high level. I was born in New York City, and I grew up in Long Island, and I used to ride 3 or 4 times a week on Long Island in Westbury. My father, he was very active. He was a lot of fun to be around. He was very enthusiastic about all sports, and it was very nice to do things with. I would say I probably learned more from my mother about how important it was to be a decent person, to be a good sport, and all that. She was, wanted to be sure that I had good manners and everything. But he wasn't so interested in that as she was. But as I say, he was great fun to do everything with. He was very enthusiastic. And he was, as I told you, quite a good golfer and tennis player, and obviously a really good rider.
With all the atmosphere of an international match, America's all-star polo team rides for charity at Westbury, Long Island. Their opponents, Bostwick Field, headed by Pete Bostwick, charge right down to Meadowbrook territory, where Pete drives one through the uprights for a counter.
He's, as I say, in two halls of fame, the steeplechasing Hall of Fame and the Polo Hall of Fame. He was an 8-gold player, won 6 U.S. Open championships in polo. But my father always, he used to go to the racetrack 5:30 in the morning to train horses, and then he'd come back and he'd play 9 holes of golf, and he'd take a nap, and then he'd go back to saddle a horse for a race at Belmont Park or wherever it was, or he'd at 4 o'clock he'd go and they had practice polo games, in the summer at Meadowbrook. But my father was very coordinated, and my mother of the Curtis family, she played in 1 national amateur. And my mother's aunts, Harriet and Margaret Curtis, they were very good golfers. Margaret Curtis won 3 national amateur golf championships, and Harriet, I think, won 1, and they played each other in the finals one year. And they were very good golfers for a long time, and in 1932, they donated the Curtis Cup between the United States, England, and Ireland. My brother and I were 5-day boarders at the Aiken Prep School. That was a local prep school. I think I was there around 8 years, probably from the time I was about 6 until I was 14. My family didn't get down there from Long Island until the end of October, I would say, and they were there until the end of May. On the weekends, my mother would pick me up after the Aiken drag hunt. We'd go home for the weekend, spend the weekend with my family, and if the weather was good, on Saturdays we'd play 9 holes, and on Sundays we'd play 18 holes. Aiken Prep was I don't ever remember there being more than 43 kids in the school. It was very small, good teachers. Headmaster was a terrific guy, big on sportsmanship and all that. A guy called Harold Fletcher, and was a tremendous person and quite a guy. At Aiken Prep, you played everything, and bicycle polo was a big sport at the Aiken Prep School, and I became, as time went on, one of the better players there. And in horse polo, the top rating is 10 goals. In bicycle polo, it's 8 goals. And I ended up, by the time I got to the last 3 or 4 years, I was a 8-goal player. And I didn't have a particularly good background in any particular sport, but probably the sport I had the best background in was golf. Didn't realize I was any good until I'd won 4 school championships at the Aiken Prep School. I didn't realize I was any good, but I was pretty good for my age, I guess, because if you win a school championship, you're better than the other kids and everything like that. But anyway, tennis, there we had a half an hour lesson once a week, which is not very much, tennis. I ended up winning I think I won the school tennis championship there 3 years in a row. I wasn't a kid that was probably too aware that I was a pretty good athlete at that stage of the game. And I always respected everybody everybody I played with, people, and I had a perfectly nice way about me. I wasn't cocky, so anyway, I think I was probably, pretty well liked by the school in general. I don't ever remember having any problems getting along with my schoolmates. At St. Paul's, I went to St. Paul's, and I think in the fall of '49, I was 15 years of age, and my father told me, he said you'll really like the hockey when you get there, and he was right, because I didn't know how to skate obviously very well. I played on the 7th intramural Isthmian team. Anyway, I didn't make the varsity hockey team until my 6th form year, my senior year. And I was a pretty successful tennis player. I won the school's championship singles championship 3 years in a row. You know, it didn't matter what sport I played, I always did the best I could. I originally was hoping to go to Yale, Harvard, or Princeton, an Ivy League school, and not only because you got a good education, but because I had good hockey and squash and all that stuff. And so I took a PG at the Hunt School in Princeton. I worked pretty hard there, and I got to when I got to Middlebury, I was fortunate in that Middlebury is a small college. I was good enough to make the varsity hockey team. I played 4 years there, and the last 2 years I played on the first line with two very good players, Kenny Curry and Mike Caron. I had a run, when I was in school and college. I won the school championship in tennis, and in golf too. So my freshman year, I won the Blue Key Award. The Blue Key Award is for the best student athlete. I always get a kick out of that because I was a mediocre student. And there was also the John P. Staple Memorial Trophy for sportsmanship, good attitude. Obviously, it didn't hurt to being the captain and playing number one on the tennis team for 4 years, plus winning the New England Intercollegiate Golf Championship, which was a big surprise, and playing hockey for 4 years at Middlebury. So it was a very nice honor. I was lucky. I had a fantastic wife. Her father and my father were in the same class at St. Paul's. Probably didn't take her out seriously for a year or two. As time went on, I was spending too much time commuting down here to see her, and so we decided to get married. It all worked out fine. Rented a little house up there for nothing, and had 2 kids, and we eventually, of course, had 2 more kids. It all worked out great. Once I graduated, I ended up at H.N. Whitney, Goadby and Company. It was a small brokerage firm. I could combine my sports and my family and business all at the same time without, it worked out terrific. A lot of times for the big tournaments, I was able to, because of the hours and everything, go to the office in the morning until 12 o'clock. So I got a half a day in, and then I'd get a train out, and that I could qualify up until 2 o'clock. Playing in the Open it's very difficult to qualify, and I was pretty accurate, and I was always a pretty straight hitter, not real long. And by God, I ended up shooting 70 on the west course and 74 on the east course at Boulders Roll Golf Club, and for a total of 144, and that made it by 1 shot. That's all. The Open was held at Wingfoot Golf Club. I shot 78-75 in the first 2 rounds and missed the cut by 3 strokes. I guess the only consolation was that I beat Jack Nicklaus by 1 stroke, and only 6 amateurs made the cut. I also played in the Open tennis in 52. I got in as a ranking junior player in the East, and I lost in the first round to Charlie Masterson, who reached the round of 16. But, I guess there's only 3 or 4 people that have played in the National Tennis Championships and the U.S. Open Golf. In court tennis, I played in a lot of Opens and amateurs.
There is still much the master can teach to Pete Bostwick, a championship player in golf, polo, and several racket games, and the man who most of the game's few experts believe will be the next Open champion.
Over the years, I had success in a sport that I really enjoyed, both before and after double hip replacement in '87. in rackets. I won 2 U.S. Opens in rackets. I also won 4 gold rackets championships at Tuxedo Tennis and Racket Club. The biggest upset that I ever did in sports was winning the Centennial Rackets in Montreal in 1967. The English guys, most of them had a little stronger serves than me, and once I could get in the rallies with them, I could play with them. In '69, I went over and I played for the World's Court Tennis Championship, which was obviously an open. I played a guy named Frank Willis, who was the reigning British Open champion. We played the first leg of the match at the Racket and Tennis Club in New York, where I took a lead of 7-3. For the second and final leg, we went to the Manchester Tennis and Racket Club in England, where I won 4 more sets to win the championship 11-8. And I decided that if I was going to be in England, I might as well, which I'd never done before. I played in the French Amateur Golf Championship and the British Amateur Golf Championships, but they weren't open. They were amateur. But they were, you know, those players at that level are pretty good. In the French Amateur, I reached the semifinals, which was the 5th round. I lost to the defending champion, Alexis Gaudio of France, 3-2. In 1969, the British Amateur was played at the Royal Liverpool Club in Hoylake. I reached the round of 16, the 5th round, where I lost to Peter Tupling, who made the British Walker Cup team that year. The Northeast Amateur was a big tournament. It was 4 rounds, and it's one of the top tournaments on the amateur circuit. I won in '68, and that was probably the greatest golf tournament victory that I ever had, because I beat 3 Walker Cup players. I was 5 shots behind going into the last round, and I had a putt. I was not a particularly good pressure putter. I didn't have the greatest set of nerves on those 2, 3, 4 footers. I had about a 4-foot putt on the last hole, and to this day, I don't know how that putt got in the hole. Christ, I gave it a terrible stroke. Kind of yipped it and Christ, it ran around the hole, but we got to the bottom, and I won it by a stroke. But that was a really good win for me, because croquet putt had just been banned. The United States Golf Association and the English Golf Association, whatever, decided to ban it because it didn't look like a stroke, a regular stroke. It was absolutely the same stroke, it was just different position. And on the cover was Sam Snead, myself, and this guy Bob Duden. And the gist of the article was, what were these guys going to do as of January 1, 1968? But I changed my stance and used a different putter. And I won the Northeast Amateur. There were some other big ones, and I'd won the Travis Memorial, which is a big tournament at Garden City Golf, and the Long Island Amateur, which was at Meadowbrook. I guess, you know, when you consider that I played, 4 or 5 sports at a fairly high level, that I was able to, I never played squash seriously until I was 30 years of age, and I beat probably 3 or 4 guys that are in the Hall of Fame. So for the amount that I played, I was fortunate to do as well as I did, including winning 3 national championships in different age brackets. Well, I loved all the sports I played. Ice hockey was my favorite. After graduating from Middlebury, I joined the St. Nicholas Hockey Club in 1958 and played with the St. Nics for 25 years until retiring from the team in 1983. I also played senior hockey for the Beaver Dam Winter Sports Club from 1958 to 1984, during which time I also coached the younger kids. As far as the tennis goes, one tournament that I was proud to win because of the high-quality field was the Homestead tournament in Virginia. While my hip replacement surgery in '87 slowed me down, I fortunately was able to continue playing competitive tennis. I should mention my brother Jimmy. Jimmy was a very good athlete. We played each other in the finals for the World's Open Court Tennis Championship. In 1971, I beat him for the World's Championship, and he re-challenged me, and in 72 or 3, he beat me. And he was the World's Champion for about 4 years, and he'd had enough. He retired with the championship. He was smarter than me. I kept playing. We actually won quite a few national open court tennis championships together and amateur court tennis championships together. We won 2 very big golf tournaments. We played a lot of our golf at Meadowbrook and also quite a bit at Piping. And he and I won the Ike tournament in 1971. We actually won 2 Andersons, 1974. We also won the club lawn tennis championship at Piping Rock, but he just was a good all-around athlete. I should also say my sister Laura was an excellent angler and loved big game fishing, and in the 1980s held the North Carolina state record with a 656-pound blue marlin. I also had a lot of fun playing in several pro-ams. It was fun to be around all those good players and everything, and to play with them. In 1951, I played with Horton Smith, winner of the first Masters tournament in 1934. And I also was fortunate to play in a Pro-Am with Sam Snead in 1966 at Upper Montclair. And Sam was probably one of the sort of smoothest natural swingers. And I was fortunate to play 8 rounds with Ben Hogan. He, in my opinion, was the greatest striker of a golf ball that I've ever seen. And then there was Jack Nicklaus. I've played 4 rounds with Jack, 4 golf rounds, 2 in the 60s at Seminole. Spent 3 days with Jack, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Went fishing with him once, and I played 2 rounds of golf with him. Unbelievable 3 days. Can you imagine? And in recent years, Jack and I played tennis together. Well, I'll tell you, the 3 best grass courts I've ever played on are Jack Nicklaus's at Law Street Village. I'm so fortunate to have such a terrific family. My kids, my grandchildren, my son-in-laws, daughter-in-laws. Yeah, it's been a great experience. It's been a great fun experience for me to be able to play with so many different members of my family. You know, I was lucky to have 4 kids that were good athletes and could play with me in national championships. My son, Pete III, after he got out of college, I played on the St. Nicholas Hockey Club. I played on a line with him for 2 years. As I tell people, we weren't quite as good as Gordie Howe and his sons, but we weren't bad. And then I started to play with him in some father-son tennis tournaments, Agawam Hunt, the Nationals, and we did pretty well. All my kids were good athletes, but none of them were serious tennis players. They played in the summers and when it was convenient for them. When I was 1969, the team that won the national 70 and over for the daughter, we'd beaten twice, Khaki and I, and we were fourth in the country. Lili Nason was a very good rider at Foxcroft School. She won a jumping class in the Washington International Horse Show while she was at Foxcroft, and never played much tennis until she got married to John Nason. And when Khaki couldn't play any longer, I drafted Lili to play with me, and for the daughter, this is. And we actually did quite well because Lili was basically a club player. In fact, in 2004, we won the National 70 and over for the daughter clay court championship. So we've continued to play on and off, and then when Lili came down with a tennis elbow a couple of years ago, I drafted Janet, who was an assistant squash pro at Southport Racket Club. And we got to the finals of the 80 and over clay courts and grass courts the last 2 years. So for us to get to the finals of those two tournaments was a nice accomplishment. And my grandson Jamie Wilson and I, when he was at St. Paul's, we got the finals of the National Grandfather-Grandson 3 years in a row at Longwood Cricket Club, and we continue to play in club tournaments together. It was so much fun playing, if you include hockey, 5 or 6 different sports at a fairly high level. You know, it didn't matter what sport I played, I always did the best I could and really enjoyed it because it was so much fun. And, you know, it wasn't life or death, or very seldom did I lose a tennis or a squash match or a golf match or something. Did I sort of bring it home and feel bad about it? I mean, because, you know, a lot of times you get beat because the guys are better than you are, a better player than you are, and I understood that. I mean, I'm not saying I like to lose, but I was fortunate to win enough so that losing didn't affect me. I guess I'd like to be remembered as somebody that loved a lot of different sports, was a good competitor, was a good sport, and had a lot of respect for the people that I played against. You know, I was so lucky to have a fantastic wife and family, and all the grandchildren seemed to like me, and watch them play as much as I could. Now, I tried to instill upon them to play as hard as they could play, and be a good sport, and you know, basic stuff like that, because that was something my mother was very helpful about, with sportsmanship, being nice to other people, polite. So, yeah, I hope that some of that rubbed off on them.
Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, wonderful to see so many people here for this celebration of the career of Pete Bostwick tonight. Can somebody, if they can hear me at the back of the room, put their hand up? Good. Okay. If you'll excuse me, I would like to start with one or two thank yous. And the first one must be to Nancy Saint. This evening was Nancy's idea, and slowly it got to the point where we said, well, what about during the British Open? And that's how it came about. And Nancy was in touch with her greatest friend from way back, Kaki Bostwick Wilson, Pete's daughter. And my second thanks, therefore, is to Kaki and her husband Harrison, who provided all the fantastic sports boards that are on display this evening. I think they've... Nancy then got all these reproduced from the information that Harrison had provided online. So thank you to Harrison and Kaki and Nancy for the boards that are here. Next, I'd like to thank the T&RA, who agreed that they would take this evening under their wing. I'd like to thank Chris Davis, the CEO, and his team over in Centenary House, Jemima and Canberra and Carolina. They've done a lot of work on helping for getting this evening underway and registration. So thank you to the T&RA. And of course, thank you to Queen's for allowing us to host it up here in the President's room. And could we thank Paul and Alex, who have done all the arrangements about the catering. Alex has been busy on this now for weeks and weeks and weeks. And thank you very much indeed to both Paul and Alex and their team here at Queen's. Then I'd like to say thank you to Ben Gatenbeek, who is doing all the streaming for the British Open and very kindly agreed to extend his day and help out with the IT side. Don't ask me how it all works. All I know is that Ben's in charge and it's working. And there was interest from the United States in this evening's event. Howard McMorris was in touch with Chris Davis, saying people would love to be able to see a bit of this evening. Ben is facilitating that, so many thanks, and in honor of the fact that it came from Howard. Howard, I'm wearing my United States Court Tennis Association tie that he presented to me 9 years ago at my retirement party at Lord's. Most importantly, I think we should say thank you to the Bostwick family and the Gengler family all the members who have come over, especially for this evening, from the United States. That's a great honour that you've bestowed on us, and it is wonderful to see you all here, and everybody's going to get a chance to meet them and hear from quite a lot of them. So, we've got 6 sports that Pete was genuinely world class at. And we're going to start with the one that a lot of people here this evening are going to be very familiar with, the rackets. And I want to go back to 1967, when we put together the most incredible team to go out to Montreal for the Expo 67 Rackets invitation event. In that team, we had 1 future world champion, 2 British Open champions, 3 amateur singles champions, 5 winners of the amateur doubles championships, with a total of 23 amateur titles, 6 winners of the Noel Bruce Cup, with 32 wins to their name, 3 winners of the Foster Cup, and 4 winners of the public school doubles. So we were pretty damned confident with that team. The only top British player not in that team was Charles Swallow, British Open champion and twice challenger for the world title. But every other top player from this country was out there. We don't have some of those players with us anymore, I'm sad to say. But the senior person from that team, who's here this evening, is Charles Hugh Williams. Charles Swallow is here. Charles Hugh Williams. And I would like to ask Charles whether he would like to come and give us perhaps some memories.
Yes, 1967 goes back a heck of a long time, doesn't it? We were a very happy band of people, and we didn't start actually where this story really develops, because it didn't involve Pete until we all knew that this man Bostwick was going to play in the singles, not in Montreal, but Boston. He didn't last too long. He was mopped up by James Leonard, who had twice challenged for the World Championship. He didn't beat Geoffrey Atkins, but nobody did. Then we went up to Montreal, and really it was quite extraordinary, because there was no Pete Bostwick with us, around us, or anywhere. No. He arrived towards the end of that week, and the temperature by then in Montreal was 85 degrees. It was May. Expo 67 and the centennial, I believe, of that club. And we were having a marvellous time, really, thinking how good we all were. And the first round was Pete Bostwick against James Leonard. 3-love, Bostwick. The second round was almost exactly the same, but it was Jeremy Hogbin, a charming gentleman, good player, very good doubles player, 3-love. Semi-final, by then people were beginning to think, goodness me, who is this chap? And he didn't actually look tired in any of the games that I saw him play. Most of us were exhausted. As I said, 85 degrees in any court. but the Rackets court, it's very, very warm indeed. In the semi-final, he won that too, and by the way, it included, as Howard says, some fantastic players. He got the semi-final and won that 3-1. And the guy who he played in the final was me. I'd beaten one of my old adversaries, Tom Pugh. I mopped him up, and I got to the final, and I feel pretty pleased with myself because I'd also beaten Martin Smith, who was the amateur champion. And Pete and I knocked up, warmed up, because I don't want to say something that's wrong in front of you Americans, warmed up, and we started. And all I can tell you is, it was agony. We couldn't kill the ball, probably because we weren't good enough, but because the court was incredibly hot. 2 hours later, 2-2, 2 games all. I think it got to 2-7 all. And I was sort of minding my own business, feeling pretty knackered, but I thought, well, I'll pop a couple of serves past him. But it wasn't mine to serve then, it was his. And he served it, not round the walls, not high, straight up the front of the court and straight back at me. Well, I was so knackered, I didn't move at all and it hit me. Nothing to worry about in that context. I missed the next 4 serves and he won the match. And it was the most extraordinary thing because try as I might, I lost the match when he first hit me, no doubt about that. I was so amazed that he thought of doing that. I hadn't thought of it. Anyway, from that day onwards, Pete and I saw each other when I was in New York, and he always came, Pete, how are you? And he said, Charlie Hugh, and he was just a tremendous performer. All I can say is that he was been a person who we all admired hugely. He didn't play in the Rackets competitions, he had other things to do. But he was the best natural games player I've ever seen in my life. So very nice to see his family here. And he was just a great guy. And in New York, he was like a god in that racket club. I should know, I've been a member of it for a long time. Okay, that's me, Howard. He was terrific.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Incredible performance by Pete in that competition. And in the T&RA annual report, they drew attention to the fact that there are no schools in America with rackets courts. So nobody starts rackets in the States until they left school, and if they're lucky enough to have a parent who can start them off in one of the clubs. Whereas all the people that we had out there had had 5 intensive years of training at school, playing loads of school matches. So the T&RA drew attention to the fact that people don't start rackets in the States till late, and that anybody who can beat the people he beat must be a world-class performer. That's what they said, and they were right. So that was the first of the games. Now we're coming on to lawn tennis and squash, which we're joining together this evening because we have Louise and Nancy Gengler. The Genglers and the Bostwicks have been really close family friends for more years than they probably care to think about. And the Gengler sisters are going to have a word to you about Pete as a squash player and as a lawn tennis player. Thank you.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here, and what an honor to be here for Pete and the Bostwick family. We were privileged enough growing up to spend a lot of time with Pete and his family, primarily at the Piping Rock Club. And this is the club where Pierre Etchebaster taught myself, Nancy, and our 3 other sisters, was our introduction to tennis. And at the same time, he was working with Pete to hone his court tennis skills. So it was a pairing from the start.
Very much so. I've forgotten my glasses, so I'm going to. I know I have them. But she's already bossing me around. Okay, so when Pete, when I was playing squash, Pete and I had sort of a regular game Monday or Tuesday in the week, and I remember at the time being surprised that Pete's focus was never on the results of any previous tournaments. So in other words, he would never say, "Oh, how'd you do in the event?" or, "Did you win or lose? Who did you play?" It was always the same thing, which is, "Nancy, what are you working on?" And so we would play, and he would find a way to expose whatever weakness I was working on at the time. And for Pete, it was not so much about winning and losing as it was about learning. And probably, well, for sure, that's the most important message that Pete transmitted to me was, if you're learning, you're never losing. And Pete was all about learning, and that taught me a lot. It's a wonderful way to approach a game. The other anecdote I have about Pete is that he's one of the very few athletes I can count on one hand, maybe 3 fingers, who genuinely appreciated his opponent's winners and great shots, regardless of what stage in the match it happened. And I think that's a very rare quality, and a wonderful quality in a sportsman. And the other thing I wanted to say is that Pete started and ended every competitive situation with the utmost respect for both his opponent and the sport. And in many ways, Pete is one of those rare athletes that was able to eliminate ego in his athletic pursuits. It was very clear that it was about both respecting his opponent and, more importantly, the sport that, whatever the sports that he was playing. Okay, you can have your glasses back. Okay, don't make me laugh.
Yes, as Nancy said, Pete practiced a lot.
Yes.
And at any given day at Piping Rock, you would see him out on the lawn tennis courts. It's hard for me to keep saying lawn tennis instead of tennis.
Right.
But you'd see him out there. He could be with anybody. He'd be with my 10-year-old younger sister working out, or with some, over the years, whether it be someone back from college or a touring pro. And he was always, as Nancy said, learning and trying to get better. And he'd find a way to make it competitive. So with the younger kid, you would start up 15 love or 30 love, or you could only hit it here, or I could, he could only hit it there. And he was always playing with his toolbox of annoying tricks and things. So he'd go through his toolbox, and then he'd always end up inventing something else. But very much into that. But he also played a lot. He liked to keep score, and there was a winner and there was a loser. But he, again, enjoyed the competitiveness of that. And at the club, it was an absolute thrill and excitement if you were asked to join Pete in one of his matches. And that thrill and excitement was paired with dread and fear when it came to who got to play with Pete and who was playing against Pete. If you were selected to play against him, you had to deal with one of his amazing underhand serves. He would name them all, and some of them would bounce and go up over your head. The other ones would bounce and go to your left or come in from your right and go here. So that was, but he never made you feel bad or put you down. Again, he just loved the absolute thrill of competing. And of course, one of the ultimate and best stories, Kaki, as you know, about your father and Pete is, I don't know if it was after his first hip surgery or at a point where he could no longer compete with sort of the select elite group that could really give him a good match. And his reaction is, well, isn't this great? There's so many more people I can play with now. And that was Pete, clearly an amazing athlete who did a lot of winning and championships, but it wasn't just what he accomplished in terms of the wins and losses, it was how he did it. And that's where he gets the respect from anyone who's ever known him, and he's just an ideal in terms of respecting the sport, the people who play it, and he was a true gentleman who strived to be his best, and we all appreciate that, and it's nice to have tonight to honor him. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sir Nancy and Louise. Squash, Pete. Of course, it was hardball, not softball. Pete was ranked number 7 in the United States, and he won a number of age group national championships. Lawn tennis, he played at Forest Hills. How about that? And he loved to play tournaments with as his partner, a member of his family. And I think that shows what a great family man he was too. So now we come on to golf. Now we didn't have a member of the 1967 Expo team here this evening who might have played golf with Pete. So I have asked the best golfer that I know we've got here this evening, who is the CEO of the T&RA, Chris Davis, who played to 4, not now, but in the past. 4, is that right? Or better than that, Chris? Slightly better. I'm sorry, I thought it was 4. And so I hope that Chris could come and say one or two things about Pete as a golfer, and we've drawn on a lovely article about Pete's golf. So here is Chris.
Thank you, Howard. I'll square root the 4 and take a 2. Thank you very much. I think the one person we've not thanked, and perhaps this will happen later, but Howard Angus has put an awful lot into this. He's thanked everybody else, and I'm sure we're going to thank him later, but I would actually like to extend my thanks and our thanks to Howard. Indeed, I was quietly sitting at home when the phone went, and Howard rings me quite often, and the phone is smart enough to know and give me an alert. It's Howard on the other end. The only thing I check is how much battery I've got left in the phone, because it could well be a whole 60 minutes or more talking about balls, rackets, walls, paint, rugby, the school, and the latest. Oh, sorry, I should mention the coefficient restitution, one of his favourites, which crosses over to rackets as well, to golf as well, of course. But the latest passion has been Pete Bostwick Jr. and talking about this evening, how we're going to make this a brilliant time, getting everybody involved and getting you all in. He then flattered me and said, "Chris, you're such a great golfer." I corrected. I know when he's going to pause, so I do get time to speak back to Howard. He does breathe occasionally on the phone. I said, haven't played for a while. He said, neither did Pete. So that was no excuse. So I am going to draw from a little bit of past experience, an article that's written. But first of all, where did Pete get his talent from? I think his mother was, Lara Curtis Bostwick, was a fine golfer. His great aunts, Harriet and Margaret Curtis, were champion amateur golfers. And they founded the Curtis Cup matches, which is the biennial competition between the best women amateurs from the US and Great Britain and Ireland. So which is still going today. So what a fantastic pedigree. Now, as Howard intimated, and I was trying to work out how much of what I was going to say he was going to say before I actually got here. Not much, thankfully. We don't have anyone here this evening who probably played golf with Pete. I might be wrong. So what we've done is drawn substantially out of an excellent article written about Pete by Bill Field, a well-known golf sports journalist for the Met Golfer. The article was titled "American Sportsman, Long Island, Pete Bostwick, maybe the greatest athlete you've never heard of." I'd probably say that's not exactly true in this room, when we'd all heard of the great former world real tennis and or court tennis champion. So I think we've seen that pedigree. So we've drawn very much from that particular article. And Pete, of course, excelled in the 4 racket sports, golf and ice hockey, which stand out as examples of what can be achieved if somebody's got the time, the talent, and the tenacity. Of the 6, I always actually think golf's the easy. I always love to say that golf is such an easy game. Nobody's barging you, gouging you, ice hockey. Nobody is actually cutting the ball down into a nasty position, running in front of you. You're not trying to take the golf ball at 180 miles an hour. Actually, all you do is you take it out of your pocket, you put on a tee, you take a weapon of choice, and you hit this rather large green patch, probably called the fairway, maybe the green, depending on what you're playing. And then you wander down after it, sprint down after it, and you take another weapon, and you put on the green, and you put it then into the hole with a third weapon. And you've got a birdie. So easy, so easy. And the only thing that gets in the way is that little gap between your ears. And that's who you're really playing when you are playing golf, of course. Yes, I mean, high handicappers hate it when I tell that particular small little story. He was, of all the 6 sports, a true amateur. And what I mean by that, he was not like a professional sportsman. He's not being paid for it. He just loved the game. And, of course, amateur comes from amo, amas, amat. So it's to like. And a quote from Pete was, "I played all these sports because it's a way of, not because it was a way of winning, just because I loved to do it." And that's what we define as the amateur. And has there anybody has played quite as many multiple sports as Pete? Who knows? Well, there are a few, but Pete was just absolutely exceptional. And another quote was, "If you have good hand-eye coordination and learn to play all these games, I think I could play at an even higher level if I'd stuck to just one." But of course, he just enjoyed the challenge of jumping from sport to sport. Just a little bit about Pete and starting up. He developed during his childhood, and much of which was spent in Aiken, South Carolina, where he and his brother Jimmy would spend weekends, usually playing about 27 holes or so at the Palmetto Golf Club. He had a very consistent stroke. Now, what I mean by that, his coach Ernest Jones had taught him it was all about swinging and playing to the ball. And for those of you who managed to play golf and ended up down the driving range, you often see people just over-hitting, and that certainly wasn't Pete. He used to say, swing as hard as you like, as long as you don't destroy the swing motion. That was all important, as well as a good grip. When asked a few years ago, what was his greatest performance at golf, he replied, he thought for a while, he said, well, actually quite easy. My best performance as a golfer was as an amateur, qualifying for the US Open, which I think was Wingfoot, in 1959, and finishing one shot ahead of Jack Nicklaus. Now, it wasn't admittedly, it wasn't a classic Nicklaus US Open. But if there's one golfer in the world you'd like to say you beat him by a shot, it might be the Golden Bear. He also played he also played tennis and golf with the Golden Bear over time, and he played golf with other greats such as Ben Hogan and Sam Snead. And during the 60s, he had the privilege of half a dozen rounds with Hogan at Seminole in March, just as his preparation before he played the Augusta Masters. So we're talking about different stratospheres between my golf and Pete's golf, Howard. He's probably one of the greatest amateurs of the Met area during the 60s and early 70s. He won the 64 Richardson Memorial, the 66 Travis Memorial, and the Long Island Amateur, 68 Northeast Amateur, and the Hochester Memorial in 1968. He won 8 club championships at the National Golf Links in America, 7 at Piping Rock, and 1 at Seminole Golf Club. He'd also partnered his younger brother Jimmy, a skilled multi-athlete as well, and they won the Anderson in 70 and 74, and the Ike in 71, both team titles. Throughout his life, Pete had been known very much for his character as well as his athletic achievements. Harrison Wilson, who's here tonight, said his father was never competed with aggression, but with precision, perseverance, and a positive spirit, along with impeccable sportsmanship. I think what we'd call that today is the true Corinthian spirit of competition. That's probably all I've got time for, because you probably want to move on to the last one. Howard, thank you very much for a very short phone call, and I will now hand you back.
Thank you so much, Chris. One shouldn't forget that there are only 3 people who have played at Forest Hills or Flushing Meadow and played in the US Open Golf. Pete is one of those 3, pretty select group. So now we come on to Pete, the ice hockey player. Now, we're not too hot on ice hockey in this country. It's brutal. I have never been to a sporting event so frightening as going to ice hockey in the United States. And Pete loved it. He just loved it. And we are going to ask, if we may, Jamie Bostwick Wilson, Pete's grandson, if he would like to read what Peter Crisp, an old ice hockey friend of Pete's, had to say about Pete, the ice hockey player. So.
As he mentioned, my name's Jamie Wilson, and I'm one of Pete's 11 grandchildren. I'm sorry to hear that you don't like ice hockey in this country. We love it in America, and it's one of my favorite sports, and was one of my grandfather's favorite sports. So I'm speaking on behalf of his ice hockey career, and I'm going to read a letter written by one of his good friends, Peter Chris. Pete Bostwick's ice hockey career. Recollections from a friend, November 2022. Pete's distinguished ice hockey career began at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, where he played 4 years on outdoor natural ice before the days of artificial ice skating rinks. After St. Paul's, well known for its hockey, he played 4 years at Middlebury College in Vermont, another institution well known for its hockey preeminence. His senior year, Pete was the assistant captain, 4th highest scorer in the East, and was voted to the All-East team. Following college, Pete tried out for the 1960 U.S. Olympic hockey team. He also played on 2 teams at the same time. One was the Beaver Dam Winter Sports Club, a unique private club in Locust Valley, New York. Pete captained and led the St. Nicholas Hockey Club for 25 years, from 1958 to 1983. The St. Nick's players are all former college greats with no home rink, and their opponents are top colleges in the East and a handful of other fine amateur teams, mostly in the Boston area. The St. Nicholas Hockey Club was founded in 1896 and is believed to be the oldest amateur ice hockey team in the U.S. They comprised the U.S. Olympic team in the 1932 Olympic Games. Pete's hockey career spanned 50 years and was a source of great enjoyment with many of his lifelong friends. Pete and I played on the same line for 22 years. I'm quite sure he can remember almost every goal he scored. And importantly, during those years, I do not recall a single penalty that he ever received. Pete was the very finest of sportsmen, a true gentleman and an extraordinary competitor. What a privilege it was to share that experience with such a fine man. Respectfully, Peter Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I had a story that I wanted to tell this evening, but there isn't time, I don't think. But it involved ice hockey. We'll see. We now come to the one sport that Pete was the best in the world at. Real tennis, court tennis. 1969 to 1972. And the person that Nancy and I really wanted to be here this evening to speak about Pete's real tennis was Frank Willis, the pro, many years at Manchester, and the person who played Pete in 1969 in the challenge for the World Championship when Naughty Knox had retired. Sadly, at the moment, Frank has no windows in his house, and they're all being replaced, and he and his wife Margaret have a deadline. They have to have the house decorated with windows in for the carpet layers to come this coming week, and if they don't have the house ready by then with all the decorations, then the carpet people have said they can't have it before Christmas. So Frank very sadly wrote to me and said how much he missed the fact that he wasn't going to be able to be with us tonight, where he would have loved to have exchanged stories with friends. He said mostly exaggerated, but it would have been fun. However, I've asked the doyen of rackets and real tennis at the Manchester Club, Brendan Hegarty, whether he would say what Peter said in an email to me, which unfortunately I forgot to bring with me, so I've had to write it out for Brendan, and I know I've missed an important sentence. So, Frank, I'm sorry, but this is part of what he said. Brendan.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard.
Ladies and gentlemen, appearances to the contrary notwithstanding, I'm far too young to have seen the great World Championship battle between Frank and Pete Bostwick in 1969. Fortunately, however, some footage of the second leg has survived, and you may well be able to see this later on the screen. It's very revealing, as you will see. In Frank's absence, I'm very happy to read his short tribute that he has sent to Howard. My memories of Pete are from the World Championship Challenge. I spent endless hours on the tennis court prior to the matches, rolling balls off the penthouse and trying to perfect the correct stroke. Ball on the penthouse, end of rally. But no one told Pete. In the first 4 sets in New York, Pete hit just 5 balls onto the penthouse in open play. Fantastic control. I played a World Championship challenge and was beaten by a better player. A great champion and sportsman and a gentleman. Happy memories. Frank I've known, of course, for very many years. I had the privilege of meeting Pete on 2 or 3 occasions. I'll just add 2 observations of my own. When I met Pete in Chicago at the opening of the reopening, I should say, of the tennis court, we had a bit of a talk about the World Championship match. And you may or may not recall that Pete went into a big lead in New York. When it came to the second leg in Manchester, Frank was still somewhat out of sorts on the first day, leaving Pete with just 1 set to win to bring home the title. On the second day, however, Frank found his form and took, I think, all 4 sets on that day. When I spoke to Pete about this, he said, I was convinced I was going to lose. I could not see how I could beat Frank in that sort of form. He said, but Northrop Knox, who was my mentor, took me on one side, sat me down, and talked me slowly through it, and gave me back my confidence. And on the following day, Frank lost when Pete took the 1 set he needed. A great encounter. The other observation I make is that I saw him play in, I think it was the 1997 Boomerang, the doubles, with, I think it was Ralph Howe, who was quite the slowest player I've ever seen. He put a snail to shame. But what I particularly noticed was actually not the play, but Pete's practice session beforehand. Was he kept his eye, he played the stroke, and he kept his eye on the spot where the ball had been for at least a full second, but probably longer, before he looked up to see where the ball had gone. Very, very striking, and I think it might have been something that he brought into his tennis game from his golf. But I was privileged to meet him. He was a wonderful all-round sportsman, and as everybody has said, and I would echo, a great gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brendan. To come back to just a little bit more real tennis. I was remembering the first time I met Pete. And that goes back to 1966, when I was captain of the British Van Allen team on tour to the United States for the inter-varsity match. In those days, it was Oxford and Cambridge against the Ivy League teams. And I think it was about the third or fourth time the Van Allen Trophy had been played, and we have been ever since so grateful to the irrepressible Jimmy Van Allen, the inventor of the tie-break and his photograph is here on the court tennis board, and his brother Sammy, the wonderful Sammy Van Allen. Judy and I very much miss meeting up with Sammy and Betty every year when they came over to Wimbledon. And I was on this Van Allen tour, and it just so happened that at that time I was keeping a 5-year diary. So I was able to actually refer back to the start of the Van Allen tour matches. And I wrote down a list of all the early matches and practice sessions we had, and it covered a page. And during that time, I was lucky enough to get a few minutes on court, not only with the famous Jimmy Dunn in Philadelphia, but also I had a set with Pierre in New York. And I just come from a pretty intense practice period leading up to the British Amateur Championship before I flew out to the States. So I was in tip-top practice, to be honest. I've been playing for almost 3 years. And in the match against New York, I'd had already 12 days of intensive play and was raring to go. Pete, who I had to play, hadn't looked at a real tennis racket for nigh on 5.5 months. I know that was true because I heard it not from Pete, but I heard that. And I managed somehow to squeeze past him. That must have been galling for somebody who was such a good competitor as Peter. Now, many players might just have laughed it off. Not Pete, not Pete. Brother Jimmy, possibly. Yeah, he might have just said, oh, it's one of those things. No. Pete took the rest of the week off. He came into the New York club morning and afternoon and practiced. Had a nice sleep on one of those marvellous benches in the locker room in New York over lunchtime. Played again in the afternoon and arranged to play me for a return match which took place at Green Tree, organised by the great Clary Pell, the only time I ever played at Green Tree. And of course, Pete, having got some practice under his belt, gave me a thorough drubbing, as you'd expect. But it really told me something about Pete, because there was no sense of revenge or anything like that. It's just that he was a great competitor, and he wasn't going to let some bloody little Brit come along and upset the apple cart of rankings. So he needed to do something about it, and he did, and he did. So that was the first time I ever met Pete. We played quite a lot in the 60s and 70s, and it was always a joy to be on court. And I had exactly the same feeling in playing Pete that I did in playing Frank Willis. And that is, if I could beat them, gosh, you know, they're great players, much better tennis players than I am, and I have to run around like a maniac to try to compete with them. And if I could beat them, lovely. But if I lost, you respected them so much. And Judy used to say, the one person that if you lose to, so be it, was Frank. And she would have felt exactly the same about Peter, watching me play Peter. And it just so happens in the autumn, that same autumn of 1967, that Sir Alec Douglas Hume, who at that time was president of the MCC, wrote a foreword for a book for another big influence on me as a young person. He was the fourth Prime Minister of the Queen's reign. He was a long-standing Prime Minister. He lasted a whole 365 days. And this is what he said, not about Pete, but when I read this, I thought, this is how I feel about Pete. What did his philosophy add up to? That matches are played to be won. Opponents are there to be beaten with skill and style and chivalry, but to be beaten. He exemplified the will to win, tempered by good manners. For him, it was not the rules, but the spirit which made the game and the man. That, to my mind, is how many of us who knew Pete regarded him. And in preparing for this evening, I sent an email to Kaki, and I asked where Pete kept his kit, all his sports kit, because I wanted to have a better picture of Pete arriving home in April, playing his last game of real tennis for the season, and needing to get hold of his lawn tennis racket and his golf clubs and whatever else he was going to play during the summer. But I didn't have a picture of this. And Kaki very kindly said that I can quote here her response to my question about where Pete kept his kit. Dad kept all his sports equipment in his sports closet in the house we grew up in. It was the first closet that you walked in the house, and every time you opened it, golf clubs, tennis rackets, hockey sticks, squash rackets, court tennis rackets, and rackets would come tumbling out. All of his golf buddies would come over from time to time and see what new putter he had bought, as he had well over 50. The mess drove Mom crazy. So when they moved into their next house, she had a closet designer come in and make separate holders for his rackets, big cubby holes for his endless supply of golf clubs, and shelves for his golf balls, sweatbands, tennis balls, hockey pucks, etc., as well as an area in the back of the closet where he put his hockey sticks, bags, skates, and jerseys. Of course, before long, he ran out of room, so he just put the leftover equipment in the garage, where it sits today. And I loved that email because it gave me a bit of an insight into Peter that I'd not been familiar with, and the family. And it was somehow very comforting to me that, like me, he was pretty untidy with his kit and drove our respective wives potty with the amount of junk we had around. We have heard some extraordinary tales of Pete as an athlete, and the reason we're here this evening celebrating this great amateur athlete is not so much all the things that he won, but the way that he won them. That was what made him extra special. In one of the pieces after Pete died earlier this year, the writer said at the end, "Few have achieved more at more sports than Pete." I wrote back, "Name me one." I've not heard back. So, could we raise a glass to, if you have one, to, in my mind, the greatest all-round amateur sportsman of the 20th century, to Pete Bostwick. To finish our evening, I would really love it if Khaki would come and say a few words on behalf of the family, and it is so wonderful that so many of Khaki and Nancy's families have come for this evening. Khaki.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Khaki Bostwick Wilson, the second of Pete and Lili Bostwick's 4 children. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate our father, Pete Bostwick Jr., an amazing athlete and an even more exceptional person. Dad would have loved seeing you all and talking sports with each and every one of you. As much as he loved competing, those of you who knew and played with him knew that the camaraderie he shared with his fellow competitors was so important to him and brought him enormous joy. First of all, I'd like to thank Chris Davis and the Tennis and Rackets Association for hosting this reception in memory of our father. You can't imagine how much it means to all of our family that you would honor him in this way. And we thank the Queen's Club for allowing us to celebrate him in such a beautiful and historic place. Finally, special thanks to Howard Angus and Nancy Gangler-Saint, who initially conceived of having an event of this type and worked so hard over the last few months to make tonight happen. You have given us a very special gift. It was quite a week in July when we lost both of our parents, 6 days apart. but they were fortunate to have had a truly wonderful life together. Mom was the love of our father's life for 67 years. So it wasn't a big surprise after she died, our father joined her only 6 days later. I'd like to introduce the members of our family that are here tonight, so I ask that they please come up and stand next to me. My sister Lili Bostwick Nason, she's going to hate me for this. Lili Bostwick Nason, step on up. Her husband John Nason. John? Is he going to the bathroom? Oh no, here he comes.
A little slower than it used to be.
Okay, my husband Harrison Wilson. My son, Jamie Wilson, and his girlfriend, Christy Donovan. Here's my family. I wanted to share with you a few stories about my dad. The video sums him up pretty well, so I'll try to keep my comments on the brief side. Not only was Dad a sports figure that could remember points from court tennis matches 50 years ago, as well as the holes where he sliced or hooked a shot in golf, he was a family man and a true gentleman who possessed integrity, had a great sense of humor, was hysterically funny, and was kind and thoughtful. Dad valued simplicity in his life. He was as uncomplicated as they come. With such a warm and friendly disposition. He was enthusiastic, fun, could laugh at himself, always kept a positive attitude, and quite simply loved his life, and of course, his sports. For a guy who was so well liked, Dad did have some enemies in the lawn tennis world, and Nancy and Louise Gengler had mentioned this. I think a lot of people mention it. All because of his nasty little underhand trick serves, many of which were adapted from shots used in court tennis, squash, and rackets. He was proud of these shots, particularly in his later years when his 4 hip operations left him unable to cover much ground on the court. His favorite underhand serve in tennis was the looper. He had a lot of this and this and this. I was watching you play your court tennis match today. I saw a lot of my father in you. He would hit the ball about 20 feet in the air, putting on as much topspin on it as he possibly could. It would land in the service box, and if the returner wasn't paying attention, the ball would bounce over their head. He could actually change a match around with one of these serves. But when he realized that some didn't appreciate these unconventional shots, not wanting to make more enemies, he decided to only serve them to people over 15 years old, and tennis players good enough to appreciate his skill. Nevertheless, some still didn't find his serves a bit funny. Of course, his kids and grandchildren got such a kick out of these serves that they started using them. Dad had some great one-liners. On the tennis court, hit down the middle, it'll solve the riddle. And when someone would compliment his athletic ability, his typical modest response, uttered with a chuckle, he always had a chuckle, was, I'm a jack of all trades, but master of none. He was also known to call the director of a court tennis, rackets, or squash event and say, hey, I've got an ice hockey game at 4 p.m. Saturday afternoon. Would you mind giving me a bad draw? I'm happy if you put me against the top seed, so that if I lose, I can make my hockey game, and it's also good practice for me to play the better players. And if I'm winning, I'll just default on match point, so my opponent can continue playing in the tournament. For Dad, it wasn't so much about winning or losing, it was about playing. On a more serious note, I honestly struggle to think of anyone as happy as Dad. After his first bilateral hip surgery at the age of 53, we thought he would go into a depression. But once he had recovered, he said, as Louise brought up and Nancy, this is great. Now there are so many more people I can play with. Before you knew it, he had shifted from the A players to B and C players, and had started to play in a lot of the girls' games, which he thoroughly enjoyed. Near the end of his life, when he was confined to a chair and his bed, he became a bit forgetful and slept a lot. But he always had sports on his mind. One day I walked in to say hi to him, and he said, "Oh, hi, Khaki. I was just in the middle of a dream, and I was in the finals of a tournament at the Westchester Country Club." I responded, "Dad, that's great, but you weren't a member there." "Oh," he said, "well, it sure was a great match." Dad was the greatest person in the world, and I really mean that, as does our family. He brought so much joy into all of our lives, and was a great example for not only how to be a great sportsman, but how to be a great husband, father, grandfather, and friend. Treat people well and be happy with who you are. He loved competing, had impeccable sportsmanship, and was gracious in victory and as well in defeat. As much as he enjoyed his sports, he never took his accomplishments or himself too seriously. And most importantly, the camaraderie that came along with it all. That camaraderie includes a number of you in this room. And I know Dad is looking down on us now with a big smile on his face, with appreciation for your being here. Thank you for honoring him in such a special way. Thank you. I've got to do one more thing. We'd like to donate one of my father's World Championship rackets to Chris Davis and the T&RA for permanent display in the museum behind the West Court. Dudum? Oh, is it? Dudum. Anyway. Doo-doo. Anyway, Howard, Nancy, thank you for everything. And Kristen, thank you. Thank you very much. So there it is. Thank you.
Sorry. On behalf of the T&RA, the racket, which will go on display in just behind the dead on, in the West Court, with many of our wonderful artifacts as the Bathurst and other key rackets. And I'm a great world champion. Thank you very much, Khaki.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Khaki.
One or two and has it a half a yard. That's good.
Outside, the architecture might be described as industrial Methodist, but inside it's a shrine to the true sport of kings. Louis X died of a chill after a strenuous game. Charles VIII killed himself when he crashed into the wall of a court. James I was murdered after a match in Scotland, and Henry VIII built himself a court as recently as 1529. But today, for all its antiquity, the game is almost as hard to find as its origins. It was actually invented by French monks batting a ball around the cloisters as a break from making the cures. But now, 600 years later, you can only play it in 17 places in Britain, 7 in America, 2 in Australia, plus a few in France. Its devotees are mostly noisy, wealthy and affable. At the Manchester Club, some were also in an advanced state of excitement.
I would say it's the greatest sport game in the world. It's ever is. Intriguing, fascinating. Fascinating game.
Well, I think the appeal lies partly in the fact that it's a very fine game, it's great fun to play, and partly in its medieval methods of scoring, which give the older people like me a certain advantage over a young player who isn't quite as experienced.
I think I've always enjoyed playing all bat and ball games, and I think this is a very agreeable one, and a lot of my friends do it. because it's a minority sport, I think perhaps wherever you go in the world, you'll find people who, will immediately sort of be friendly because there are so few people doing it.
What so few people are doing is playing real or royal tennis. The court is actually a replica of a monastery quadrangle around which you hit a ball of compressed cloth with a small lopsided racket. Its rules make company law seem simple, but David Gaskell volunteered to lighten our darkness.
It is a unique game. It's the oldest ball game still played in the world, this game.
In fact, this is really like asking you to explain Christianity in 30 seconds, but can you tell us the basic principles of the game fairly briefly?
Well, I'll try to. The side we're standing on now, which is known as the chase side, service always takes place from this side. It differs from lawn tennis in this way. And the service can only change when a certain point in the game is reached. When what is called chases are laid. I won't go into those in any detail at the moment, but it doesn't change from game to game. The other things, of course, that separate it from lawn tennis are these galleries all the way around here, and the winning openings, as we call them. Behind me here, this is called the dead-on. Now, if you put a ball into there from the other side of the court, you've won the point. It may look very easy, but it certainly isn't, I can tell you. This is called the penthouse, and the serve must bounce on that sloping roof, the penthouse, the other side of the yellow line there, above the net, and it must fall beyond the line on the other side. It may strike anything else on the way, but that is the way to do a good serve. And you have two, as in lawn tennis.
The reason for the excitement was that this was World Championship time, and since there'd been only 17 World Champions in the previous 230 years, it was hardly a match to miss. Tweedy gentlemen arrived puffing from Hampshire, and other gentlemen in lightweight suits had flown in from the States, but damn it all, there was an American contender. And here he is, Pete Bostwick, a Long Island stockbroker, henceforth to be known as Mr. Bostwick because he's strictly amateur, the epitome of the Ivy League athlete, US Rackets champion, ice hockey player, and good enough golfer to play in the British Amateur Championship while he's here. His opponent, Frank Willis, henceforth to be known as Willis because he's strictly professional, a Manchester lad who, in fact, had to get special permission to wear these shorts instead of the traditional long flannels of the paid retainer. But if all this implies snobbishness, then it's wrong. If real tennis is exclusive, it's because there are only 30 places in the world where you can play it. Its patrons, true, tend to drink port instead of pints, and they don't hurl the empties onto the court. But neither accent nor overdraft is a bar to membership. People from all walks of life, from all income brackets, are here as Mr. Bostwick starts to serve. One of the snags about the monastic architecture of a real tennis court is that it makes little provision for spectators. As the Bostwick-Willis battle gets underway, there's an absolutely full house of fans, all 87 of them. You can stand for a quid, but the best seat will cost you £10. A world title match is no lightweight affair. It's a double-header with the best of 13 sets being fought out on each man's home court. The first leg was in America, where Bostwick rattled up a 7-3 lead. The return leg in Manchester is spread over 3 days. Britain's role, I'm afraid, was the familiar one of providing another gallant loser. Willis cut Bostwick's lead with 4 straight wins on the second day, but on the third, Bostwick warmed up for half an hour against the ex-world champ, Naughty Knox, and he promptly won the decisive set and the title. So the oldest sport in the world is reigned by the newest nation to play it. But what are the differences between real tennis in Britain and America?
Well, I think the biggest difference is the courts. These courts are older than ours, and you get some different bounces here, mainly because of the flagstone. The courts are just as good here, but I think our courts, because they were built in the early, around between 1900 and 1920, they have a little smoother floor, and therefore I don't think it's quite as difficult to get used to the court over there. Although I'm sure that Frank had trouble adjusting from this court to our court.
Yeah, playing over
and
there.
the balls are a little different.
Mm-hmm.
The balls over here are slightly heavier because you have a little heavier cover. I think it's a little better material actually than ours.
Looking into the future, I mean, do you see this becoming a big game in the United States?
Well,
you haven't got the courts, but
unfortunately, I think it's a tremendous game, but because we only have 7 courts and they're so expensive to build, that it's hard to see it really ever getting to be a big game like lawn tennis or football, baseball, or some of the other golf or something like that.
Sure.
Which is, unfortunate, I think.
The deal with you, of course, would be the same as with the golf pro, that you pay to play against the professional. Is that the same thing?
That's it, yeah. That's it. So we spend most of our time teaching. And all of a sudden we've got to get bang into practice and play this kind.
Good.
Which is hard.
And supposing if you win a world championship, does that mean a great deal to you financially?
It means a great deal to me. Maybe not financially, but it certainly does over a long-term policy, because I can maybe get a chance to get a better job, or be paid more money where I'm working now.
So what future now do you see for yourself as a pro in this game?
Not such a bad future. I'm still classed as being very young to play for this type of title.
You're 25, aren't you?
25, just 25. So there's a long time to go.
But, I mean, in mapping out your future, where are you going to be in 10 years' time? Can you say that?
No, I've no idea. Depends who's going to pay me the most money.
Money, of course, is hard to come by in a sport mostly played in such demotic settings as Oxford, Cambridge, Queen's Club, Lord's Cricket Ground, Hampton Court, and a few stately homes that echo nightly to the tramp of the Death Watch beetle. Yet, as a personal view, I rate it second only to pelota as the finest court game played in the world.